So I'm just going to start. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming to our second session of Café con Leche, our space centered around community, healing, authentic narratives, and storytelling. So again, I'm just going to open up with a short story and take you back to a small Peruvian household in about 2001, 2002 on a Saturday morning. Saturday mornings were the best part of the week for me in my home because it was when we really had family time. My father worked very much, so he would go to work during the week. He'd leave for work before my sister and I woke up, and he'd come home before we go to sleep. And then as we got older, right as we went to sleep. So Saturday mornings were our first opportunity to be in, like I said, in family. So my mom and I would make breakfast, and on this Saturday morning, we weren't making breakfast. We were making fried eggs and just toast, probably some fruit, jamonada, which is what we call like cheese and deli slices, maybe like some like sliced ham, café con leche for my parents, of course, and then milk or juice or water for my sister and I. So breakfast already. My sister was probably setting the table. My mom and I were putting everything on the plates, and my dad would be in his room. So once everything was on the table, my mom would yell out "servido," which is like served. And then one of us would run over to get my dad. So he comes over, sits down. We start eating breakfast. And I come from a home where family manners, and family roles, parent roles are very, very strict and very enforced. So I'm not sure exactly what happened, but probably my sister probably spoke while my father was speaking. So he very abruptly, he banged on the table and he yelled at her. And she was probably like 7 or 8 years old. He yelled at her that he was talking. And we were all, I was still eating, obviously. And she was just sitting there fuming, but she was in the spot where she really couldn't say anything back, right? She definitely couldn't say anything back. So she's like 8, and you can just see when a kid is like infuriated but not able to say anything. So she's looking around and looking at my father, and all she thinks to do is to grab her fork and very quickly, at the speed of a ninja, really, reaches over the table and pops my father's the yolk of his fried egg. And he sees it coming, and he's like, "Oh yeah!" He screams out, and the yolk kind of pops everywhere all over his table. And my sister just so bold, and she was just still fuming, holding the fork. And my mom was trying so hard not to break composure of laughing, but she couldn't. She just absolutely couldn't. There was no preparation to expect that the 7-year-old was going to attack my father's breakfast. So she kind of smirked, and then when she started, broke character a little bit, my sister started laughing, and my father was just looking at her in audacity, like the audacity of his American children to do this, to attack his breakfast like this. Then I started laughing, and then at the end we all started laughing, and we continued on in the breakfast. But it seemed like to me, when I was thinking about what to talk about today at Café con Leche, highlighting Healthy Richmond, this seemed like the most appropriate story because this was a table where my sister had no voice. She was in a position where she had no voice and she had no power to say anything. And she very quickly, on the balls of her feet, creatively had to shift the narrative and switch the situation and take back her power, and did something that was completely unexpected from all sides and changed the whole narrative. She was culture shifting in this particular space. So with that, just a very, very short intro, I would like to introduce Healthy Richmond. As I said, we have Roxanne Carrillo Garza, we have Carlos Limas, and we have Vivo, and they are our Healthy Richmond leaders. They will introduce themselves further, and I'm going to pass it over to Kelly Robinson, our RCF coach, to facilitate this space.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, and welcome. We'd love to welcome my friends from Healthy Richmond. Nice to see you all again. And what we'll do from here is just have a series of questions that these folks can answer in whatever way that you'd like to, just to sort of share with us who you are. And really, more importantly, what is the experience that you're having at Healthy Richmond that you'd like to share with us so that we can also have that experience with you? So I will be chatting the questions as I ask them, because some of them are a little long. The first one is to please share your name, your role on the Healthy Richmond team, and how it is that you made the choice to be serving this community at this time. And then the second part of the question, which I will chat in there as well, is if Healthy Richmond's vision is reached, what would it look like and feel like to be a community member here? and to share a personal story about what it would look like and feel like to be walking around on the ground in the healthy Richmond of your vision. So whoever would like to go ahead and start.
Yeah, I can start us off. So my name is Carlos Lemos. I'm a project manager for resident leadership at Healthy Richmond. Nice to meet you all. Thanks for being here. And what got me into this, I'm a lifelong Richmond resident. I came back from UC Santa Cruz, where I studied film and history and wanted a job in my community. And so I heard about this position and was really excited. Um, and so real quick, like this, has everyone heard of Healthy Richmond at some point before? Just trying to gauge we got some nods, some and some people haven't heard. So yeah, I just like to gauge the room to hear how much people know and fill in those gaps. So um, and then the second question, oh, and I also was part of different organizations in Richmond, like Rise. I did an internship at Richmond Pulse. I worked at Urban Till. So I was already within some of the Healthy Richmond partners. Um, and so then that kind of brought me into this space. And then the second question, vision reached, man, I feel like community would just feel like the systems weren't against them and that systems could go into communities and go and feel like they're also welcome because they're essentially serving the community, that Black and brown communities aren't displaced by gentrification and everything else that comes from that. And I can go on and on. It's just a rich history in Richmond, and I'm really passionate about history, especially local history. So I think I'll just leave it there for now and pass it to my other peeps.
Thanks, Carlos. Yeah, so my name is Roxanne Rio Garza, and I'm the manager of Healthy Richmond since about 2013. And yeah, my choice for coming to Healthy Richmond, actually, I worked for the health department for years before and worked on equity work within the public health arena. But really wanted to leave the system and get back out into the community to do work on the ground. And for me, we just actually went through a whole process with our key partners and some of the campaigns that we do to come up with a new vision. As some of you may know, we're entering a new phase of our initiative. And so we felt like this is a good time to pause. And so I think what we collectively envisioned was that the community transformed in such a way that resident leaders, which are youth and adults, and organizations and system leaders work together to demand equity in education, economy, healthcare, and safe communities. But more than that, to increase race equity and eliminate racism. And we really felt it was important to articulate that. In previous years, I think we were talking about health equity, but in this next phase, we wanted to really be more articulate about what we were actually trying to do. And what's at the center of that is having community residents who are most impacted by race equity and anti-Blackness actually transform and make radical changes to address racism in our community and our systems. And it's really in order to build power among people who can feel like they can influence the city, county, other entities that are there to serve the community, and then reallocate resources in a way that shifts community wealth and shifts services in a way that can help the community thrive. So that's sort of giving you a sense of our sort of new vision and purpose. And I'll turn it over to V.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Roxanne and Carlos, for starting us off. I think, well, let me introduce myself. My name is V. I am the campaign manager and communication specialist for Healthy Richmond. I've been working here for a year now, and how I got involved with serving this particular community. I came here really for, I grew up in San Jose, but I lived in Alameda County for the last 8 years. And so I've always had a respect for Richmond. I know it has a rich history, like a very vibrant and rich history. And every time I say that every time I meet someone from Richmond, I always have a positive experience. So the people here are just great people. And how I came to the job is I was supporting from an administrative level direct service programs. Before this, I worked with Seneca Family of Agencies and I supported their crisis programs. And I wanted to go back to my roots in advocacy, big A advocacy. I was a youth organizer when I was a youth. And I worked on various public health policies. And so I just took a look at the description and I thought, you know, this really fits what I want to do right now in this point of my life. And I think if Healthy Richmond's vision were to be reached, I think walking around I would feel so much more at ease knowing that the people that I just moved to Richmond in January, but the people that I care about in this community would have more access to resources. Just more access to resources. And, you know, a personal story is I am the co-lead of an ABI COVID task force with the county. And through that work, I learned from the resident leaders that Asian Pacific Islander residents from Richmond and Contra Costa County actually leave Contra Costa County to Alameda County, for example, to get resources because resources here are so thin. In fact, I was just helping the director of Family Justice Center's Richmond site to find a linkage for a Vietnamese speaking client. She needed a therapist. And we ultimately had to float the idea of sending her all the way to San Jose to find somebody. And, you know, it's just stories like this that made me really impact me and has pushed me to really work with everyone else to mobilize this campaign to bring more COVID resources to the API community, in addition to providing a space for advocacy to make that big A advocacy systems change. So yeah.
Thank you. So it sounds like healthy Richmond equals equitable Richmond, or Richmond where there is equity. So I want to ask you this question, and I'm going to chat it because it's a long one, and please feel free to answer whatever aspect of this question really resonates for you. So Roxanne mentioned being here at Healthy Richmond since 2013. So that means that, you know, work has been done. So I'm curious if you will share some stories about the people and the things and the systems in Richmond that are already equitable because you've been working so hard. Right? So what is equitable now? And then what is the impact of this equity in these places that you're going to describe? What potential gets unleashed within this equity? And then what are some of the things that Healthy Richmond is working on right now to continue to increase community strength and wellness? So chatting that question in so that you all can see it. Go ahead, anyone can start.
Okay, yeah. So this question is really interesting for me because I feel like COVID-19 has really changed and fed into a lot of the inequities that we've been trying to address, but has also created a new momentum to look at equities that people were a little more hesitant or slow on, specifically around Black Lives Matter and the number of Black lives that have been lost across the country. And there's been a lot of people organizing at each city to look at budgets, to look at different aspects of systemic racism. But for Healthy Richmond, a lot of the past work has really been around the school district and looking at education equity. If you've heard of the school to prison pipeline, before I joined, they were doing a lot of prisons, not school, and the connection between a quality education for everyone, especially Black and English learners and Brown students here in our district, and looking at the student success of different demographics. In the health, there's a lot of people who don't have health care, specifically undocumented people. So we worked with the One Contra Costa Coalition to do the Contra Costa Cares program, and worked with statewide efforts for Health for All. And this year has been a real uphill battle before the presidential election for obvious reasons, but even after, trying to push the governor to use this moment and start the work now. And then again, for education, we work more on LCAP, which is the Local Control and Accountability Plan, and trying to work with parent advisory committees and parent leaders. We do try to work with students, but we lean on our partner at the Rise Youth Center to help organize, but it's been difficult to just rely on them and try to extend farther into the district of other youth, because we know they're excited to get involved. And then lastly, the biggest thing that keeps coming up when we talk about equity is housing. And Healthy Richmond hasn't explicitly committed to housing, but we get pulled into it because we do a lot of resident leadership work. And so residents are like, how do I use my voice to make sure that those buildings that are being sold look a certain way and not just to the highest bidder, or dumping and sidewalk improvements, traffic safety. So in the parkway, there's a bunch of semi trucks that go through North Richmond as a shortcut, but then those kind of have impact on the roads and the safety of children leaving Verde. It's just a bunch of things trying to address, and each community is going to look differently. But I think the big one that comes to mind is land use. And I'll pass it to Roxanne if you want to talk more on that.
Thank you, Carlos. Yeah, I mean, the story that comes to mind for me, particularly to land use, that sits in our economic justice arena. And North Richmond, many of you may know, North Richmond was the original sort of redlined neighborhood in the West County area historically, and was subject to a lot of divestment over the years. And so a couple of years ago, we really set about getting a group of residents together to hit the streets and do a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, with all of their neighbors, and come up with their own community vision. And I remember in that project, at first we had Latino residents sitting on one side of the table, African-American residents sitting on another table in the Missionary Baptist Church there, North Richmond Missionary Baptist Church. And there was a little bit of hesitancy, like, how do we move forward together? Sort of the newer, younger families with the families who had been there for generations and experienced a lot of that history. And so they did that analysis. They did their own community visioning session that was held at the neighborhood school. I remember our Supervisor Joya, who's always used to kind of getting up and speaking, was told, this is the residents' time to share their community vision. So we didn't hear from any of sort of the elected officials that day. It was really just the residents sharing their community vision. And then they set about creating their own quality of life plan, and held several meetings with, now extending out to some of the people who make decisions, right? The housing authority, the city, the county. And after, probably 4 or 5 months, they came up with their own quality of life plan. And what's striking to me about that, it's actually, there's a video of some of that on our website, but the community getting up in that same church where we started those first meetings and really presenting their quality of life plan, how that neighborhood should look 10 years from now, and seen the residents who were kind of hesitant being in the same room together, helping each other as they prepared their presentation. And just how it was received. The county now is looking at that plan in terms of other unincorporated areas and the general plan update. And it's a place where we can do some advocacy around the sale of the housing authority land, which is going to be huge. Half the neighborhood's going to be redeveloped. And 3 of those members actually sit on commissions themselves now. So just the power of seeing them really design for themselves what that neighborhood should look like, and then carry that message to the county and present to the Planning Commission in Martinez. I mean, all of that, I think, just tells you that the power of community when it's, you know, supported, and you have to support residents over a long period of time, how powerful that can be.
Roxanne, before we move on to V, can you used the term, you said West Contra Costa County, Richmond was one of the first or the first lands to be redlined. What do you mean by that, in case there are folks on the call who don't know what redlining is?
Right. So redlining was the practice where communities of color were relegated to certain neighborhoods. And so in North Richmond, you know, during the whole effort around the shipyards and World War II and all of that, there was housing that was set up in different places in West County. And many of those units still exist today that are pretty nice, actually, in the hills of West County. The North Richmond neighborhood is really where African-American residents largely lived. And what was really unique about that neighborhood is they didn't have access to, I'm looking over at Betty because you know, they didn't have access to community wealth, right? They didn't have access to bank accounts or how to get a loan. And so they built their housing on their own with their own resources. And I remember hearing residents talk about, you know, that there was dirt streets, like there was just really poor infrastructure in that neighborhood. And that neighborhood was resilient. I mean, if you look at the history of North Richmond, it had jazz clubs and restaurants and, you know, amazing local entrepreneurs that really made that neighborhood still thrive, even though it was divested by our government and by the city at the time. It's actually in some books, North Richmond is. The Color of Law, I think, is the name of the book.
I guess I'll just jump in here. I think Carlos and Roxanne have provided a lot of very concrete examples. So I think I'm going to address this a little more abstractly. I think this question is referring to what are the strengths of Richmond? And I think as an abstract concept, but not that abstract, is as I mentioned, the spirit. That you know, every individual that I've met here in Richmond, from Richmond, have been very, you know, strong people. And I know there's resilient might not be the right word, but definitely within that line of thinking. And I think that, you know, that spirit is something that is something I think very unique and is a strength of Richmond. And, you know, in terms of what Healthy Richmond is working on to increase this community strength and wellness is, I think, you know, at the individual level, the individual engagement, the individual working with individual community leaders, because I fundamentally believe that it's individuals who change systems. So in order to change systems, you need to invest in individuals. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Carlos here, who does our resident leadership building work. So I think that that investing in the individual is going to be the snowball effect that changes systems. And I think we've done a good job of that so far.
So you've touched a little bit on this question, but I'll go ahead and ask it anyway in case there are other examples that you have. And if there are individual examples of people or shifts or things that you've noticed that you can tell a story with this. So what does it mean for the Richmond community to build power? And what happens when power is held over the Richmond community instead of with the power, with the Richmond community?
Good afternoon. I guess I can jump in. It's called struggle. I'll piggyback on Roxana about the redlining that happened back in the day. They are in the books. They came here to work in the shipyards to come together. Then when their money and they were looking to buy, they couldn't buy anywhere but into North Richmond and Portchester. That's where a lot of the pastors came together to start the redevelopment and the housings that's going up. In Parchester, all the names of the streets is behind those pastors that came together. The community came together and had their little stores and everything, and they weren't allowed to buy in Berkeley or El Cerrito, or even if they qualified, they weren't. So when the community comes together and it's something that they want, and then City Hall doesn't want that, they'll come up with some type of restriction. So it's always a struggle when they want to accomplish things. So, but as we've been growing here lately, Richmond has become more of a partnership rather than standing in the way. Spark Point RCF has played a great part in bringing all these different communities together. So it's good looking forward. It's good looking forward. It really is. So we're helping with first-time homeowner buyers. The banks are helping with down payments. So it's a good outlook. It really is. It's a slow process, but it's a good outlet. We're going through redevelopment again at this moment in time when it's around housing and redevelopment. Hilltop is getting ready to do some redevelopment, but the community has to stay in touch with down at City Hall to see what their plans are, because they usually plan maybe 5 to 10 years out. Like it's a big redevelopment going on in housing, but it's just so slow, the process. So hopefully we can follow San Francisco County that pulled together a streamline on the housing when you bring your development people in and all the different departments and the qualifications. That's a big hurdle. And then City of Richmond, things that you want to upgrade on your property and things, we don't have enough inspectors in Carolina to come and in a timely manner so that it could just roll most smoothly. And that was a little part of when they took out the redevelopment down in the city of Richmond. So gradually we're coming back together. And as you do know, part of North Richmond is in the county and the other part is in the city. So the side that's in the county has not much a struggle as the part that's in the city part. Mm-hmm. And I can't think of the name of that street. I want to say Cherry Street or something that divides both of it. It's a long process, and we are coming together. It's looking better. I've been here just a few years.
Thank you.
Yeah, and riffing off of Regina, I mean, I think, power building is about, this idea that my liberation is bound up with yours, right? And so if we're really going to build power, among community, how do we do that, across ethnicities, across gender identity, across age, how do we really do that and create connection and interconnection between those groups? And power building I would say, has been part of the initiative since day one. So the original planning committee for this initiative was very specific in saying there need to be community strategies and community leadership at the center. And so, you can't really make policy change unless you can get the systems to recognize that they need to create a relationship with the community they serve in the vein of the community not only having ownership over the decisions that are made, but a real partnership. Like, the commissions and boards are one thing, but how can residents who are most impacted by racism and the inequities that have preceded us actually sit at the table and create the solutions, right, to some of the issues happening in their city and their county? And then how do resources follow that? And then how does accountability, really happen over the long term. And what we've learned is that residents can win a policy change with the city of Richmond, with their GARE process, their Government Alliance for Racial Equity, or the county has a whole health equity, infrastructure now, given COVID. But how can they make sure that residents are at that table making those decisions with them? And there's newer things on the horizon like Measure X and other things, but you can't really transform systems unless residents are sitting at the table designing those solutions.
And I'll just jump in here. When I would work with youth, I would tell them like power is the ability to be able to do whatever you believe in, or have the systems or change something into something that you believe in. So I'm like, if you believe that every Friday y'all want a pizza party, then y'all got to build that power. Yeah, of course, that's like kind of a weird example, but you're gonna have to need data. You're gonna have to like have narrative and a bunch of strategies and partners, and to be able to make the claim that you need pizza every Friday if it's gonna help your education. Um, Obviously, that's a random example, but that was just to get them thinking about power. And because in this country, it's hard for people to recognize certain people's humanity or their experiences unless you're going to go the extra length to provide education, call them out, put in systems of accountability. And this country has put in systems of democracy that have served a certain part of this country. And so the system is there and it has worked, but for a certain limited part of this country. And so, how are we reclaiming those systems in a way that communities are now at the table making those decisions? So, for example, in North Richmond, we were able to get the housing authority to recognize that, and now they have committed to having some of the quality of life into their RFP, and now they want residents to be part of their selection process. And rather than just consulting community and checking off a box and saying, well, we talked to the community and we're going to go ahead with electric scooters. And maybe that is what the community wants. In Richmond, some people do like electric scooters, but there needs to be kind of that decision-making process to go from the top down, not from the bottom up. And so we've been using the spectrum of community ownership to really shift systems. And I feel like a lot of people in the city of Richmond or the school district or the county like recognize Richmond's history at this point. I hope so. And they're like very committed, especially after this last year, like what can I do to change these systems? And then the power, I feel like this past 4 years have really shifted how we think of political power. I mean, we obviously thought of that when everyone had the right to vote in the 60s. And so now you have systems having to respond, and political and elected officials having to try to get some of those votes, whether they're immigrants from Italy or Europe, or the black residents that they wouldn't have engaged with in the early 1900s. But yeah, power, when I think of Richmond, is like the community. Like when city rolls out something, like there's a whole community that backed up that whole project or idea, versus, oh, did you hear about this RV pilot program? Oh, now we're gonna talk to residents. So I'm sure you all have heard of it, and Regina touched on how development in Richmond has been pretty complicated, and trying to gauge everyone's priorities and interests and agendas. And so just, having development that is led by residents and decisions, I think is really at the center of when I think of, oh, and also I had to learn that Healthy Richmond, I had to learn the difference between base building, power building, movement building, and there's like these different strategies to making change. So Healthy Richmond is movement building. So we're not essentially like out there um, trying to recruit as many residents as we can. It's only 3 staff of us, so we wouldn't have too much capacity to extend beyond a certain limit. But we have partners who work with youth or partners who work with previously incarcerated members of our community. So how do we get those people impacted by the systems to start making changes into the system? And so you've all heard of Safe Return and the great work they've done. And so those are some examples that come to mind when I think of power.
For me, power is freedom. And that sort of splits into two sort of angles. And I think what it means to build, for a community to build power, it's on one hand, sort of on the left side, it's sort of building up the capacity and building up the muscle of the community to be able to exert their agency. On the other hand, it's about removing institutional barriers that serve to sort of oppress, people and community members. And I think what happens when power is held over community, in this case, Richmond, what I've noticed is that I see a lot of residents who are, educated, who are passionate, who are, who want to be involved, who are powerful in their own, ways. But there are institutional barriers that keep them from being able to express themselves and to create the change that they would like to see. Like, for example, it's very common for parents who want to be involved in the school districts, meetings and activities, but because the meetings are held so late, they can't attend because they have family members that they have to attend to. So that serves as sort of a barrier for someone to be able to engage. And so I think it's a two sort of pronged strategy. It's removing the barriers, removing the lid, and then building up that power, that agency for people to express themselves and to find the liberation that they are looking for. That's my answer.
Thank you. Carlos, this question is for you since you're from Richmond. What do you think is and I know there's a lot of answers to this question, but from where you sit and from what you see, what's the most urgent issue facing Richmond right now?
Yeah, that's tough. I think that depends who you ask, because I think people in Richmond are going to have their own kind of urgency. I did touch on it, but housing is a big one, and especially with the pandemic and shelter in place, that really sparked the conversation about guaranteed housing and emergency services for people who are newly homeless or people who are lower middle class who are having trouble paying rent. And then in our economic justice action team, we sort of look at the network of systems that affect each other. So you need a job to pay rent, and then you need, but then the pandemic hits, so like relief funds, and then what if you're undocumented, and then is public charge, like it's just so many, it depends who you ask. I would say historically speaking, the depleting population of Black residents comes to mind for me. It just, Black people really built Richmond, and I really feel that, culturally speaking, and just like redlining again, that whole conversation. And so that, I think that historically speaking, like if you look at the population of Black residents here and how it was really concentrated in areas like Richmond, Oakland, and so on, they've kind of dispersed into other cities like Antioch, Vallejo, and other communities. And so that has really affected that sort of, I wouldn't call it political powers, but community power, I guess, that was really present, and that even Latinx communities would really benefit from as well. And so, yeah, I said housing, and then home ownership is a big one, because even though we have a large Latino population coming into Richmond, for the most part, they're renters. And so I think that's part of the thing that people don't realize is these are people who don't care what job you give them. They're just happy to have an income. Target, Burger King, farm workers. And then for the rent protection conversation, like I'll tell people like, you don't have to pay rent. Like, you know that, right? If you can't pay it, pay half, work out a deal, da da da. They're like, I don't like owing people money. Like, I don't care, but I'm not gonna risk that. I'm not gonna ask my landlord to do me a favor. That's not how this works. You sure about that? Like, you sure people have a right to not pay rent? Like, um, so yeah, it's hard to break people out of that, who, especially if they're joining other family here. So yeah, those are the urgent issues I think that come to mind. We do have a lot more organizations, and a lot of progress has been made to sort of respond to certain scenarios. So, you know, Reentry Success Center and Safe Return respond to previously incarcerated people and help them re-enter society. Um, but there's also like certain people in Richmond that still don't know about all these organizations, or don't know which is which, and they kind of need a presentation of and packaged all like Rubicon, SparkPoint, da 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 da. Like all these organizations are here to help you because they drive by it every day. They just don't know anybody there, and so word of mouth is really important. That's why I'm always trying to introduce people and say, "No tengan pena, don't be shy, just go in there." But yeah.
Yeah. So when y'all talk about Healthy Richmond, you're talking about the people, the things, the power, the systems, and the dreams and the visions. I want to ask you a question about yourselves. And that might be hard to answer because you're so committed to your work, but you go home at the end of the day, you sit down in your comfortable chair or wherever it is you find comfort at home after the end of a long day. And you maybe you let your worries slide off a little bit. Maybe you let all the urgency slide to the other side. And if you just reflect for a moment on what you love about this work, about being at Healthy Richmond, what you love, what does it give back to you?
Give back to me. I mean, I get to meet more people in my community first off, and I get to introduce certain kinds of thinking to what they might not be used to. Especially with young people, I'm really passionate about validating their concerns and what they're going through, and then lifting up like how they can advocate for themselves. Um, and and just feeling like we didn't just talk about the issue, but we actually did something. Like when I joined, I feel like there was already a lot of projects and campaigns in place. So just making sure that work gets moved on. So leaving a meeting with the housing authority and Supervisor John Joya, and residents, all talking about putting on a Facebook Live event for North Richmond development coming soon. So having that early engagement that they probably wouldn't have thought of, and then pushing them to have Spanish interpretation, even if it is probably their first time doing it, um, making things accessible. So Richmond has those little microphone walkie-talkies where people can hear Spanish interpretation live at meetings prior to the pandemic, and other API communities as well. But this was a while back when we were doing more work with the Laos community here. Um, so yeah, I mean, just sharing with people like what makes Richmond beautiful, and sharing that kind of pride, and being guided by beliefs and experience, not by political agendas or toxicity or like community organizations even. That's what really makes me feel good at the end of the day.
Yeah. Roxanne, what about you?
Yeah, for me, it's if I was participating in a meeting and you had an organization sitting next to a group of residents sitting next to potentially a systems ally, and they all are in alignment about how to move on an issue, right? COVID there's been a lot of attention paid to that, rightly so, right? But how can we talk about COVID and post-COVID in a way where we can all be working in alignment around how to respond in an equitable way? I think the first dashboards that came out from the county showed that Black and brown residents of this county were not getting the vaccinations. And we actually brought a group of residents through Zoom, and Carlos and one of our partners from Lifelong, Carla, taught the residents how to get onto a Zoom, and they were really nervous about going to a county meeting. And they went and they presented what they were feeling in their neighborhood in North Richmond and in San Pablo. And at the end of that meeting, there were members of everyone on that call in tears. And it hit really hard and close to their hearts why this COVID response work was important. We made a difference in that meeting. And I think that's what I love is, I think the secret sauce of Healthy Richmond is the cross-sector nature of it. I mean, it's bringing residents, organizations, and systems together, figure out how to transform things.
Yeah, yeah. B, how about you? What do you love?
Well, I just want to say, first of all, I really like my job. I love my job. So I get a lot out of this and I get a lot in return. And I just hope that I'm able to provide and give back as much as I do get in return. And I think for me, it's just seeing people, smile and, like we can, after a meeting that is successful, things got done, things are moving. You can just feel, even through the Zoom waves, you can feel people's energy, their enthusiasm. And it's addictive and it's what I strive for. Ultimately, I'm just a people pleaser. But yeah, I think I also come from a school of service, a mindset of service. So being able to serve this community, that act in itself really gives a lot to me in return. And just as Carlos and Roxanne mentioned, just like meeting people, the connections, there's like one, our EJAT, our economic justice action team co-chair and I are really friendly with each other. So whenever we get to hop on Zooms together, it's just really good energy. And I live for those moments.
Yeah. Does anyone that's joining us today have a question for Roxanne or Carlos or V today about their work in Healthy Richmond? Okay. Let me go back to my questions then.
I have a question. Is that okay?
Yes.
So we heard about everything that you guys are doing, and you guys are always doing such fantastic work. And it's amazing what you guys can do with just 3 people. And I always say that this tight little team of 3 people, you guys are amazing. But what are the challenges that you see coming down or right now in Richmond that you see that can impede your work? What kind of challenges are you seeing that kind of keeps you up at night a little bit?
I usually get up at 2 and then at 4. Well, I mean, I think, watching the reckoning around racial justice in the country brought me a lot of hope, because the young people who led that effort last year said, all of this is important, the protesting and everything, but we're depending on you, adult allies, to work with us to actually change policy in this country, in the police departments, in education, in getting jobs and relief from the economic stress that people are feeling. And so those of us who are in this line of work felt like this is a moment, right? And the window is open like this much in terms of the systems, right? They're now listening, right? They're now willing to have a conversation around equity, but it's not going to stay open for very long. We're already seeing backlash start, across the country around equity and race equity in particular. And so as organizers, we know we have limited time to really not leave power on the table. Like, we've been working for 10 years, and quite honestly, it's taken years to get some of these systems to even sit down at the table with us and recognize that we have the power among the people of their community. And so that there's that sense of like, how can we get some of this stuff across the line so that we at least have a foothold as the backlash happens, as it always does in this country. And then for us, we're coming off of 10 years with the endowment's investment, and the endowment is now going to move to a more regional approach. And so the 14 sites, which we were one of, they know they can't just cut us completely, but we're going to be on our own. And so a lot of the sites are becoming their own organizations or staying fiscally sponsored, but we're going to have to make up $500,000. So as the manager of the initiative, that keeps me up at night. And then the third thing I would say is the collectivity. And I'm kind of channeling Jordan Simmons from East Bay Center for Performing Arts, who, helped create this by holding the planning part of this initiative. And, we worked so hard to create collective groups working on economic justice, education, equity, health for all, and community safety. But without, funding, will we be able to sustain those collective groups working over the next 10 years? So just small things that keep me up at night, Rosalind.
I could go next. I guess for me, I'll be quick in case there's more questions, but similar to Roxanne is like, what is the future of Healthy Richmond? Like, where is a role that we can play into it? Because we've met so many residents in the past 10 years. I've only been with Healthy Richmond for a year and a half, but I've been connecting with residents who've heard of Healthy Richmond 5 years ago. Another thing that keeps me up is our name. Like, Healthy Richmond, people have come in and said, is this where you do Zumba? Can you give us tips on how to eat healthier? So that kind of keeps me up, but that's not too much of a problem. But yeah, so what does the future hold? Like, and like, what do each organization want to do? Because I think we all want to do a lot, 10, 20 different things. But like, how do we start sharing power and kind of laying out what roles each person can play, and plan out like a long-term, short-term plan. Yeah, that's the short version.
Thank you.
Do we have time for me to answer?
Sure, go right ahead.
I'll be quick as well. I think what makes me, not really keeps me up at night, but like just makes me sad is when I see people don't align. When I see that there isn't, for whatever reasons, there isn't an alignment, people are not on the same page. I mean, I don't like seeing fighting, or I'm not saying that there was fighting, but I like to see people working together and collaborative and like in a collaborative fashion. When there are times when we don't see that, that makes me really sad. So there's that. And, when at the beginning of COVID, I personally had a lot of just like, this did keep me up in the middle of the night, but a lot of anxiety around the gravity and the weight of what we were doing, especially with our COVID work, and that impact of knowing that, we are sort of helping to support, this like monstrous effort to combat this, like, this disease is, and that lives, are not like lives aren't, it's not so direct that lives are at stake, but people's lives are kind of like impacted by this work. And that pressure really, took a toll on me for some time, but I think that I'm getting to the point where I'm able to shoulder that a little more.
Yeah. Thank you, Roxanne and Carlos and V, for being here today, and all of you for joining. And at this time, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Melissa. And thank you, Melissa, for inviting me today.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Just like last time, I'm going to link or in the chat, I'm going to put a link that gives a short, feel free to click on it. It'll take you to a short video about RCF, what it is we do. You'll even see some familiar faces from in here in that same video. If any of this resonated with you, if you have questions, if you'd just like to discuss anything about Healthy Richmond or some questions, something related to what you can bring to the table around a healthier Richmond, a holistically equitable, healthy Richmond, please connect with us. We'll connect with you. And thank you so much for your time and your hearts. And we hope to see you at the next Café con Leche.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.